Hey, what's up everybody? Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I am so excited to be making this one today because it's been one that I've really wanted to do for a long time, but really couldn't do until I actually launched a podcast. And I'm so excited to say that that day has finally come. It has been such a cool and crazy experience. It's sort of been my quarantine passion project, working on this show, and so far we've done about half of the first season, and it has been the most difficult secret to keep because of how much I've fallen in love with making this show, but also just how much I've learned. This video is gonna really focus on my sort of reflections of starting a podcast and what I learned and what I wish I knew. And so if you're watching this and you're thinking about starting one, whether you have an idea, maybe you don't, or if you already have an existing one, hopefully you can take away some sort of piece of something that I've learned to improve and better your own show. First, I'll start off with Groundbreaking and what it's really about. So Groundbreaking is the first Friendly original podcast. Friendly is a media company that I started to empower young creatives and lift up their voices, because I feel like a lot of the time what happens is we are suffering these own sort of mental barriers because we're told that we don't necessarily have the resources, or we're too young to sort of embrace our own self-fulfilling project. And a lot of times it's straight out of college or straight out of high school, start with a job and then work towards your own passions. But I wanted to highlight the people who are already doing this and who are CEOs before 25, because not only are these stories inspiring, but we can really take special things away. And Gen Z is so unique because we are so dedicated to lifting each other up, and all of the guests that I've interviewed on Groundbreaking have been so transparent and just very giving with their advice and their thoughts, and admitting to their faults, but also sharing what you can learn from it too. And so I've been so inspired by this show, and I sincerely hope you'll listen. Today's video is all about you and the formulation of a podcast and what I've learned. We're gonna break this down into steps because just like the show, once this video ends, I really wanna make sure you're not sitting there wondering, okay, what the heck am I supposed to do now? So first, let's start off with your idea. Mine came just because it was an idea that I've worked with and was something that I was really inspired by, and is sort of an extension of my own media company. But for you, I mean, think about the things that you wish you would have known, or is there a show that you feel like should exist but doesn't, or is there somebody in your life that inspired you and you want to continue telling their story? Just like any other media platform, podcasting is just storytelling. I mean, I'm familiar with YouTube and writing and producing music and blogging, but podcasting is truly a whole new world, and we've seen that on the rise lately. I wrote an entire blog post about my experience starting a podcast. I will be linking that in the description. I have tons of great stats in there and just some more additional feedback and reflections that you should definitely check out after this video. And take some time. Don't feel like you have to rush. I feel like the podcasting industry isn't going anywhere, so don't fret. I would just start by maybe listing a couple things that you really enjoy listening about. So is that business? Is that politics? Is that just entertainment? No matter what, you can really find a intersection between your interests and worlds through podcasting. And don't worry too much right now about what people want to hear, because truthfully, what I've sort of found in the podcasts that I gravitate towards are the ones who have people embracing their own sort of interests, and their own presentation and hosting abilities on that topic is way more of a reason to come back and listen to further episodes than the actual topic itself. You really want to be interesting to listen to, and that's a key in of itself. So if that starts by having other people on the show, I know it's really hard to talk for an hour all by yourself. So that's why I focused on a guest-based podcast, because I love interviewing people and I love listening to their stories, and I'm such a curious person about so many different industries, so this was just a very natural thing for me to do, and it doesn't really feel like work, to be honest. Second thing we're gonna dive into is equipment. This is probably one that I think scares a lot of people, because a lot of the shows that are just the top known podcasts and are just applauded globally, those ones have millions of dollars invested into their equipment and such. But truthfully, people love shows that are just done by products that they've bought on Amazon or at Target or wherever. And that's really where I fall into. And so I use a Yeti microphone, and I'll link it in the description if you like the sort of sound quality and such. I've had it since 2016, I think, and it's done pretty well. I think it's sort of on its way out, but around 4 years of use is pretty good for what I paid for it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I use this. I just listen with normal headphones, and I actually use GarageBand to record because if you didn't know and you're new to sort of my sort of content and such, I'm also a musician, and so GarageBand has just always been the most basic platform, and I'm a firm believer in why make it more complicated than really what you need. I actually just edit the show on GarageBand. I use Splice not only to find sort of bits and elements for my own musical creations, but that's actually where I found the theme song for a show. Highly recommend you have some sort of iconic music that you always start with. It really is a good way to build a sort of loyalty to the show and give you a little bit of character too. And then of course I just literally record on my laptop, and I guess you consider your space as equipment too. Of course it's really hard right now where everybody's working from home, but just find that quiet space that you possibly can for an hour. Ask roommates, family, whoever, just to try to keep it on the down low, because background noise is really distracting and can really take away from the worlds that people embrace when they listen to a podcast. I know wherever I have to go, I will literally record my show on top of an ironing board because there's no desk. And really just you have to be creative with it. And then also additionally with equipment, of course, in this time I record all of my podcast episodes remotely. There are a ton of resources. As of now, it's about mid-June when I'm recording this video, and I know a lot more things are coming out, so definitely review this, as this information that I'm about to share is probably going to be outdated at some point. I use Zoom just to talk with my guests. It really makes a difference having that face-to-face interaction, because I've done a couple episodes where we just recorded over Zencastr, which is a really great platform. I find that the audio quality is a lot better on Zencastr, and it's always nice to have your guests use an external microphone like this if possible. And then if I'm on Zoom, I always share a link to Zencastr. I like to have a backup audio just in case one of the platforms decides to not record or delete the recording, or I mess up. I always have a backup there, so I don't have to ask a guest to do the whole hour-long episode again. I will link them in the description. I know Zencastr is working on building a video like sort of conferencing platform, which hopefully we'll have access to soon, because that would make my life so much easier, and I'm really looking forward to that as we have a ton more episodes to do. Third thing is actually recording your show. With guests, what I always do is I coordinate with them first, do a lot of outreach, and the show really started with me just asking a bunch of friends to be on it, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with there. You really want to start your show with people, if you're doing guests, with good chemistry. It shows not only your sort of first impression, but how you engage with people, and having that sort of just positive reaction and that interesting conversation between two people is going to get people hooked on the show right off the bat. Typically, I'll just send them a Zoom link, a calendar invite, and we'll make it super casual. I always like to preface with my audiences that it is being recorded, and I always say that we aren't doing it live, so I can always edit things in post if they don't necessarily say something that they like. And then of course, I always send them a couple questions right before we start. This is a little bit more unique to my show, but I mean, maybe this will help you brainstorm a few for yours. I always ask, what are a few things about your business that you really want to make sure we touch on? And then what are some things about your business that you really don't want to touch on? Just because you don't want to have that awkward moment, because podcasts are such a long interview and long episode, having that sort of awkward moment where they don't really want to talk about something is super uncomfortable for both of you, and will kind of kill whatever chemistry was there. And then I also additionally ask them just to think about the release date of the podcast, because I'm filming the majority of it before it launches. It's really strange. I always have to tell my guests, okay, think about what you would say in about 3 months. So if you're referencing an event, like think back to a couple months ago. So think about your timeline too, your release calendar. Typically most podcasts are released on Tuesdays, I think, but in no way I think is that a very specific day. Next step, we're gonna talk about editing. So of course I use GarageBand to edit everything together, and I use Splice to get all of my sounds and theme songs. I leave about a 30-second ad break. Just find a good point in the conversation to break that off. I don't typically like to do that during the recording because I don't want to cut off the people I'm interviewing. We might have a really great discussion, and again, it can just kill that chemistry. I always do the intro and the outro after I've hung up the call with them, and I always pre-write, make sure I've got their socials all ready to go and everything. I like to do a somewhat uniform intro and outro each time, but also something that's unique and new every single episode so people don't feel like they're listening to the same episode. You can really edit however you like. I highly encourage you, before you commit to one way, do a little bit more research, watch a few more YouTube videos, and find out what you kind of like and what works for you the best. You spend a lot of time. Even though I've got a pretty good flow down of how I like to edit my episodes and everything, it still takes me a long time, probably ultimately about 2 to 3 hours each episode, which isn't bad for starting out and kind of just still figuring things out. But make sure you have a system that you aren't gonna get sick of super quick. Next up, we're actually gonna talk about distribution. There are what feels like now a ton of ways to get your podcast out on major streaming services. There are a couple free ones, so if possible, and if you're willing to take that sort of little bit of extra time to sign up with them, highly encourage you to get your podcast out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and such, because there's great discoverability within those platforms, and it's really gonna enhance your viewership, and these platforms are gonna give you great analytics back so you can kind of see what pieces of your episode are piquing interest or what your demographic really looks like too. I use Anchor to distribute, groundbreaking, and I know a couple of my friends who have podcasts also use Anchor, and they're the reason that I signed up for it too. Anchor's a really great platform. It's free to use. You're able to ask your listeners for donations. You're also able to find sponsorship opportunities. I started planning the advertisement part of the show before it was even live. So what happened was I actually reached out to external companies that may want to sponsor the show. And because of that, I actually don't really necessarily use that sort of platform within Anchor, but I know it's a great use. I know there's a basic advertisement for Anchor that you can read during your show. It pays about $15 CPM, which is the cost per 1,000 listeners. But also understand that when you start off with podcasting, you probably shouldn't be in it for the money. It's not going to make a lot at first. But I have read and I have discovered that podcasting does have a higher revenue potential than most YouTube videos. And then promoting your podcast. This is, in my mind, the best and most exciting part. Get those numbers up as quickly as you can. Maybe ask some other podcasts that you're a fan of and have similar sort of vibes if you can cross promote, give each other a free ad, really just get that listener and engagement rate up. Start socials for your podcast. The social channels for my show are actually just the same as Friendly Media's, and so I don't operate another channel, but we do focus a lot on showcasing the guests of the show. If you have guests, that's really important because you're not only gonna have your audience listening, but you can also get their audience listening if you are creating really great social content that they can then repost and then direct back to your show. And always make sure you are pushing out, subscribing to the show and reviewing the show. That all helps with discoverability and keeping people listening week after week. Your constant engagement is the true evaluation of how successful the show is. And if you're looking down the line to get that sort of marketing or advertisement opportunity, that's gonna be your best resource. Very last thing I wanna talk about here is evaluation. I'm a firm believer in the final product is not always your best product, and you should always be thinking about what you can do further to sort of engage your audience with the show a little bit more. Because of that, we are gonna be constantly evaluating the show. If you use another platform, let me know about it. I wanna hear about it because maybe, I don't know, maybe Anchor isn't the best one, or there's a better site or platform to be hosting groundbreaking. Make sure you're asking people their genuine feedback. Make sure you're reading the reviews, because as much as your show is a reflection of your work and your interests, you are creating it for other people to enjoy. So not saying that their opinion and their sort of criticism necessarily needs to be 100% the determining factor in what your show looks like moving forward. They are the ones who are supporting the journey, and you really want to be giving them the best possible episodes and experience. We are starting to wrap up this video here. Main just sort of takeaways. Don't be afraid to invest in your show. I think it's well worth the while to make sure you have good quality, because if the first 30 seconds isn't your absolute best, the likelihood of people clicking off is much higher. So make sure you have a very promising first 30 seconds and have a really just great quality throughout, because I know if I'm first looking at a podcast, what I'll do is I'll skip to a random point within their timeline and just sort of see what the discussion is. So really making sure you're always putting your best foot forward. Always think about a post-production element to it. Make sure you're sharing out your socials and just giving other ways for people to engage with you in the show. That's really important. Whether you want to or not, you are the face or the voice of the podcast. So making sure you're giving a really good reputation for the show and making people fall in love with not only your voice, but you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I hope you will listen and check out Groundbreaking, my show. And if you have any feedback for me, please feel free to share. Subscribe to the podcast. I will put all of the links in the description. And if you're interested in Friendly, the media company I started for young creatives, make sure you check that out. That'll all be in the description too. I am eager and excited to see if you have ideas and truly any sort of feedback for me. I'm really excited to get people engaged with Friendly and all of the original content that's going to be coming out. And best of luck with your show too. If you learn anything, please feel free to share with me. I am all ears and I'm somebody who always just wants to learn and discover new things. Make sure you subscribe. There's a ton more content that I've been producing and working on lately that I cannot wait for you guys to see. Thanks so much again. I will see you guys soon.